While I am quietly envious of the great results painters get when using Slapchop, I personally don't really enjoy the process of Slapchop. I prefer to speed paint my miniatures by effectively painting less of the miniature. I achieve this by incorporating deep shadows and colored ambient lighting to replace standard painting techniques on much of the miniature. Not only does this approach significantly increase the speed of the painting project, but it also creates a high contrast piece that, in my opinion, looks much more dynamic and dramatic than a miniature painted with uniform lighting over the entire piece. Today we'll take a look at one way to accomplish this. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. I'm using the scientist from the Nemesis board game to demonstrate this painting technique, but I have numerous videos showcasing this painting style on the channel. As you can see from this example, I've painted only about 1/3 of the miniature as if it's illuminated by natural white light. As we shift toward the shadow area on the back, I've painted a portion of the miniature with blue OSL that is emanating from the scientist's computer screen. This is painted directly over the black primer. On the rear of the miniature, I've painted nearly half of the model with a light gray OSL. The color for this environmental lighting is entirely up to the individual painter. I chose gray for this particular model based solely on the character art from the game. One of my favorite colors to use for this technique is blue, and it's the color I've used more than all other OSL color choices combined. It can even be combined with other colors such as red for an even more dynamic finish. Other great color choices are colors such as pink or even a flame orange OSL. After fully priming the miniature with black primer, I sprayed gray primer from a high angle on one side of the miniature. I'm demonstrating this now on a model using blue spray paint, and I'm demonstrating using blue spray paint because I have decided to stop exposing my camera lens to the mist of this spray paint. I depress the spray nozzle before I aim it at the miniature. I quickly move the spray over the surface of the miniature at a constant angle. I then release the nozzle after the spray has cleared the miniature. This helps avoid speckling on the surface of the model, which could occur if I had the spray pointed at the miniature while depressing or releasing the nozzle. The goal is to achieve a light but uniform layer of color for the base of the OSL. We'll refine this with a standard brush later. To create the bright spots for the OSL, I scratch in white highlights on the raised upward-facing surfaces. This is the base of the bright points, which I will glaze over with the appropriate colors. I add these highlights to the gray lighting on the rear of the model. I also use this for the blue OSL that is coming from the scientist's computer screen. For the gray lighting on the scientist's back, I'm using medium gray thinned with water. This is essentially the same thing as slap chopping half of the miniature with a single color. I started by dry brushing white highlights over the gray primer color, and now I'm essentially applying a translucent color over those highlights. I could even use gray speed paint for this step. I've used this approach to slap chop entire miniatures in this style. I like to use Beowulf Blue for the blue light on the back, and I slap chop the other half of the miniature as normal. I won't be slap chopping this scientist model today because I want him to fit in with the rest of the miniatures I've already painted for this game. That, and I prefer to use layer painting for the well-lit side of the miniature. For the blue glow, I'm using muted turquoise acrylic ink. Acrylic ink isn't necessary for this, any translucent blue should do the trick. I like to use what I have at my disposal. I just kind of grab whatever paint feels right at the time. I certainly wouldn't try to match the exact paints that I'm using in these videos, except for Dark Plum Pro Acryl. Everybody should own some of that. I use a lot of first generation Army Painter paints in my videos, and most people aren't willing to add that to their collections. I always suggest grabbing a color you're comfortable using and is somewhat close to what you want to emulate. Exact color matches aren't necessary. The overall look of the finished miniature won't suffer at all. So now we've got a little more than half this miniature painted up very quickly with a little dry brushing and some translucent glazes or speed paints. Now all that's left to do is paint the small amount of unpainted plastic that remains. When painting OSL on a miniature from a light source located on the miniature itself, I need to make the light source appear brighter than the light that's reflected on the surrounding surfaces. I'm adding electric blue as the midtone color for the computer screen. I I then use titanium white to create a small band of brightness on the screen that will represent the most intense blue glow. I follow that by reapplying electric blue thinned with water over the thin band of white paint. This should be enough to make it appear that the screen is glowing, and the muted turquoise on the scientist's face and arm is the light reflected from the screen. My painting style of choice for the remainder of this miniature is a standard approach to layering. I begin with dark base layers over the black primer that will represent the deepest shadow colors. I'll then work my way up through the mid-tone colors and to the brightest highlights, one layer at a time. I won't use any washes or glazes for the remainder of this paint up. I have the paint thinned with water so that a little of the previous layer is visible with each additional layer. I apply each color over about 2 layers. I use the second layer to increase the opacity over a smaller area of each feature. This should create smooth blends as we transition from the darkest shadows to the brightest highlights. Layering is normally considered a time-intensive method of painting, but since we're dealing with such a small surface area, this goes pretty darn fast. Looking at the raw video footage while editing this video, I can see that I spent just a couple of minutes with each color. I know that 2 minutes per color doesn't sound like much, but keep in mind that I'm using 2 to 3 colors for each feature on this miniature. I'm painting fast, but I wouldn't consider this speed painting in the strictest sense. This miniature took me less than an hour to paint, but that's not nearly as fast as slap chopping a similar type of miniature. When painting some of the hero characters for Nemesis Retaliation with Slapchop, it only took me about 30 minutes per miniature. But you know, I like this look better. Of course, there's nothing wrong with combining this OSL cheat with Slapchop, if that's your preferred method of speed painting. When I first adopted this approach to miniature painting, I tried combining it with every style of painting I could think of. Slapchop, base shade highlight, layering, glazing, and airbrush speed painting. I've even recently combined it with grimdark miniature painting on some of my Grim Coven minis. Whatever your preferred style of painting, this is a fun way to quickly create some unique looking miniature paint schemes. It's kind of dominating my approach to miniature painting as of late. Traditional layering is my favorite way to paint, so it's what I most often use with this OSL hack. I even knock out a little bit of cheesy non-metallic metal for the wheelchair part of the miniature. This begins with a less than perfect layer of blue-black pro acryl. I then hit the high points with Iron Wolf by the Army Painter. Finally, I apply edge highlights with Wolf Gray by the Army Painter. There is nothing spectacular or time-consuming about this little non-metallic metal touch, but I prefer it over using metallic hobby paints. There's something about metallic paints that just doesn't work for me. I feel like it cheapens the overall appearance of the miniature. I'm not a metallic paint hater, I still use them on occasion for the sake of speed. I just prefer a simple approach like this when feasible. I also add some ash gray highlights to the wheel to make it look a little shinier. The last item for this particular miniature is to paint his clothing. I'm going with an olive drab look for the uniform. I begin with a base layer of black-green pro acryl. I continue the green progression with Army Painter Army Green. This first generation Army Painter Army Green is one of my favorites. It's translucent enough that I can easily build up the opacity in a few layers while preserving the darker shadow color below. I'm using combat fatigues for a natural progression to the final highlight. This bottle of combat fatigues is actually second generation Army Painter stuff. You can tell the difference between first generation Army Painter and second generation Army Painter by the packaging. The silhouette at the bottom of the label is significantly darker on the first generation bottles. It's at this point that I decided to repaint the shoulder of the uniform to match the rest of the clothing instead of having it that gray metallic color. Finally, I use fur brown to paint the leather accent pieces. I'd like to thank my incredible channel members for believing in me and what I do on this channel. You too can become a channel member for as little as $1.99 per month and receive perks such as early access to videos, extended versions of our painting tutorials, and even a tier that lets you decide which miniature I paint next. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters.